Hello, and welcome to English Story Vault. If you're learning English, you're in the right place. Let's dive into the language with a truly compelling story. Remember to subscribe, like, and comment to support the channel. Let's begin. The date was April 25, 1986. At the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine, the night shift was just starting. This massive plant was situated near Pripyat, a town built to house the plant's workers and their families. Engineer Alexander Yuvchenko arrived at the facility to begin his shift. The mood among the workers was positive. It was a pleasant, clear night following a sunny day, and everyone was looking forward to the upcoming May Day holiday. In their Pripyat apartment, Alexander's wife, Natasha, was home with their young son, Kirill. Their family life was happy. Natasha sometimes had minor worries about the safety of the nuclear plant where her husband worked, but her fears had recently been calmed. She had seen a government official on television state with confidence that major nuclear accidents like a meltdown simply couldn't happen. He claimed such a catastrophe might occur only once every 10,000 years. This official reassurance had set Natasha's mind at ease. That night, a critical safety test was scheduled for reactor number 4. The test was designed to determine if the plant's turbines could generate enough residual electricity to power the cooling pumps for a short period after a total power failure. This temporary power was essential to bridge the gap until the backup diesel generators could reach full operational speed. They had attempted this exact test before, in 1982, 1984, and 1985. Each attempt had failed or yielded incorrect results. The plant's managers were under pressure from Moscow and were determined for this test to succeed. In preparation, they had already reduced the power of Reactor 4 to about 25% of its normal output. Furthermore, a crucial emergency cooling system had been intentionally disabled. This was done to prevent the safety system from automatically interfering with and halting the test. Another complication was that many members of the incoming night shift had not been adequately briefed on the test's specifics. The procedure was originally scheduled for the day shift, but was postponed because the national power grid required Chernobyl's electricity, so as night fell, the plant seemed peaceful. The workers went about their duties preparing for the test with a sense of routine. There was no feeling of danger. But this quiet evening was the prelude to a catastrophic event. The atmosphere was calm, but it was the calm before a storm that would change the world. The flawed test. The purpose of this safety test was vital. The plant needed to know what would happen during an abrupt shutdown of its main power. Engineers wanted to confirm if the slowing turbines could briefly generate power for the water pumps. These pumps circulated essential coolant through the reactor core. This coolant was needed to prevent overheating during the roughly 1-minute delay it took for the backup diesel generators to start. Previous attempts at this test in 1982, 1984, and 1985 had all failed. The authorities in Moscow were displeased and insisted on a successful outcome this time. For the test, the reactor was brought to a low power state. It was operating at only a quarter of its usual strength. Critically, a key emergency safety system for cooling the reactor was deactivated. It was turned off, so it would not automatically abort the test sequence. Some night shift operators were not fully aware of the test's parameters. It was initially planned for the more experienced day crew. However, when another power station went offline, Chernobyl was ordered to maintain full power throughout the day, pushing the test to the night shift. Nuclear power generates electricity through a process of nuclear fission. Inside the reactor core, atoms of uranium are split apart, releasing immense heat. This heat boils water, creating steam. The steam spins large turbines, which in turn generate electricity. To manage this reaction, control rods made of a neutron-absorbing material can be inserted into the core to slow the process down. On this night, the reactor's power level dropped far too low, much lower than the test procedure required. The operators tried to increase the power, but something was impeding them. The reactor wasn't responding as expected. This was due to a buildup of a substance called xenon, a byproduct that poisons the reactor at low power levels and inhibits The nuclear reaction. To counteract the xenon, the operators withdrew most of the control rods from the core, pulling out 200 of the 206 rods. Removing this many was a flagrant violation of safety protocols and put the reactor in an extremely unstable state. The shift supervisor, Anatoly Dyatlov, was present and insisted that the test proceed. They made a series of reckless decisions to force the reactor's power to a level suitable for the test, the Big Bang. With the test underway, the reactor was dangerously unstable. At 1:24 in the morning, the power inside the core suddenly began to surge uncontrollably. It skyrocketed to a perilous level. An operator slammed the emergency shutdown button known as AZ5. This button was designed to be a failsafe, to immediately halt the nuclear reaction. But pressing it made everything catastrophically worse. Due to a fatal design flaw in the reactor, the tips of the control rods were made of graphite, which momentarily increased the reaction rate before the absorbent material could slow it down. As hundreds of these rods re-entered the core at once, the power leaped even higher. The operators in the control room were unaware of this design defect. They believed the button would save them. The reactor's power was now over 10 times its maximum intended output. Then came a deafening blast, like a massive bomb. It was the first explosion. The force was so immense that the reactor's 10,000-ton steel lid was blown clean off, shooting straight up through the roof of the building. Fragments of the reactor core and superheated nuclear fuel were hurled into the night sky. Moments after the first blast, a second, more powerful explosion occurred, likely caused by a buildup of hydrogen gas. This explosion tore apart the rest of the building, ejecting even more radioactive material high into the atmosphere. Fires ignited across the ruined facility. The heart of the reactor was now exposed to the open air, releasing a deadly plume of radioactive smoke and dust. The sight was horrific, but initially most workers could not comprehend the scale of the disaster. Reactors were not supposed to explode like this. Many people inside the plant had the same initial thought. It was war. They assumed the United States had launched a nuclear attack. It was easier to believe that than to accept that the reactor itself was the source of such utter destruction. The first bad hours. After the explosions, Alexander Yuvchenko felt the entire building tremble. He was in a state of shock, his first thought being that this was an American attack. Everything around him was destroyed and collapsing. He began searching for his colleagues near the blast area, moving through darkened, debris-filled corridors. He heard a loud hissing sound, like escaping steam. He found a friend whose face was so badly injured that Alexander recognized him only by the sound of his voice. His friend told him others were hurt. Alexander then met Yuri Tregub, who reported that Anatoly Dyatlov was demanding water to be sent to cool the reactor. Dyatlov, in his shock, did not yet realize the reactor was gone. Alexander and others attempted to reach the water pipes, wading through deep contaminated water. Through a doorway, they saw that the enormous water tanks had been obliterated. Alexander glanced up to where the roof should have been and saw a beam of light ascending into the sky. It was a strange, beautiful, shimmering column. He didn't know he was staring directly at a lethal column of ionized radiation. For a few seconds, he was mesmerized. Then a coworker who understood the danger grabbed him and pulled him away, an act that likely saved Alexander's life. Alexander made his way to Control Room 4, where he met 3 other men. Dyatlov had ordered them to enter the reactor hall and manually lower the control rods. Alexander told them the truth. There is no reactor hall. The reactor has exploded. There are no control rods. There's nothing but empty space. The men refused to believe him. Reactors don't just explode, they insisted. Alexander explained he had seen the devastation from below, but the men needed to see it from a higher vantage point. The 4 of them climbed to an upper floor near the reactor, a journey that exposed them to fatal doses of radiation. Alexander held a door open for his friends, which shielded him enough to survive while the other 3 later died. When they returned, they confirmed Alexander's story, saying the reactor was gone, replaced by a gaping hole that resembled a volcano. They had a dosimeter, a device to measure radiation, but its needle went far beyond the highest mark on the scale. They still didn't grasp how severe the radiation was. No one had ever witnessed levels so high. Shortly after, the firefighters arrived. They responded swiftly to extinguish the multiple fires, but they were completely unaware of the invisible, deadly radiation. They wore no special protective gear. Many of these courageous men would die from their exposure in the weeks that followed. In the nearby town of Pripyat, most residents were asleep. A few people who were outside saw the strange, beautiful glow in the sky over the plant. Unaware of the danger, they marveled at the sight. Later, a myth would spread about a bridge of death where onlookers gathered to watch the fire and all subsequently died. However, this story is largely an exaggeration. Most of Pripyat's residents were safely in their beds, oblivious to the unfolding disaster. Sickness and secrets radiation is devastating to the human body. It destroys cells, causing organ failure and the collapse of the immune system. This leads to a rapid and agonizing illness. The story of Lyudmila Ignatenko and her husband Vasily is a tragic example. Vasily was a firefighter who responded to the initial alarm at the plant. He received a massive dose of radiation. His skin developed horrific boils and lesions. It was excruciatingly painful. He grew progressively weaker, unable to fight off infections, and died shortly after. Lyudmila, who was pregnant, visited him in the hospital despite the danger. Tragically, her baby was born, but died just hours later. It was a period of immense grief for many families. Many people who had been close to the plant became desperately ill. Some suffered severe radiation burns that turned their skin black. They were racked with nausea and vomiting. Their immune system ceased to function. Many of these brave first responders died in agony. Initially, there was widespread ignorance about radiation. Misconceptions abounded. Some people believed radiation sickness was contagious like a cold, and they shunned the survivors even after. They were decontaminated. There was a profound lack of understanding about how it spread. Meanwhile, Soviet officials tried to conceal the accident. They did not immediately disclose its severity. Phone lines out of Pripyat were cut to prevent the spread of news, and police roadblocks were set up to stop people from leaving. They wanted to control the narrative and prevent global panic. But the catastrophe was too massive to hide. Top scientists were summoned to manage the crisis. A key figure was Valery Legasov, a prominent chemist who was tasked with assessing the situation and devising a plan to contain the ongoing danger. He and other experts quickly understood the terrible reality of the destroyed reactor and its invisible poison. A city-emptied scientists, led by figures like Valery Legasov, assessed the destroyed power plant. They measured terrifyingly high levels of radiation in the air and knew the nearby city of Pripyat was in grave danger. It was no longer safe for anyone to remain there. A massive fire was still burning in the reactor core at an extremely high temperature. To combat it, the scientists devised a plan involving helicopters. The helicopters would fly directly over the exposed core and drop thousands of tons of sand and boron, materials intended to smother the fire and absorb radiation. This mission was incredibly perilous for the pilots. The radiation was intense, and one helicopter tragically crashed during the operation. The officials made a fateful decision. Pripyat had to be evacuated. Loudspeakers across the city crackled to life. "Ayor," voice announced, "For your attention, for your attention. An unsatisfactory radioactive situation has occurred in the city of Pripyat. Residents were instructed to leave their homes, taking only essential documents and necessities. They were told to shut their windows and turn off all utilities. Crucially, they were told this was a temporary measure and that they would return in just a few days." A fleet of buses evacuated about 116,000 people from the city and surrounding areas. But not everyone left. Some elderly residents known as babushkas refused to abandon their homes. One woman famously told a soldier she was more afraid of starvation than radiation. A few young people also stayed behind, hiding in their parents' apartments. The world was beginning to learn of the disaster. In Sweden, monitors at a nuclear plant detected high levels of radiation and traced it back to Ukraine. The United States also captured satellite images that revealed the catastrophic damage. News of a major nuclear accident quickly spread internationally. Russia's government eventually admitted an accident had occurred, but downplayed its severity. Back at the plant, another urgent threat emerged. The molten reactor core was so hot that scientists feared it could burn through the concrete floor and come into contact with the large pools of water below. If this happened, it would trigger a steam explosion of unimaginable power, ejecting far more radiation into the atmosphere. 3 plant engineers knew the layout of the flooded basement: Alexei Ananenko, Valery Bezpalov, and Boris Baranov. They were asked to undertake a perilous mission: go into the radioactive water beneath the reactor to find and open the valves, to drain the pools. It was a suicide mission. They knew they might not survive. This group went into the dark, flooded chambers, located the valves, and successfully opened them, preventing a second, far worse explosion. While some stories claim these men died quickly, they actually survived the ordeal and lived for many years. Cleaning up. Danger. After the immediate explosions, a new danger loomed. The exposed reactor core was still burning, and experts feared it could melt through the concrete foundation. If it reached the groundwater, it could contaminate the water supply for millions of people. To prevent this, teams of coal miners were brought to Chernobyl for a heroic and arduous task. They had to dig a long tunnel deep beneath the damaged reactor building. The work was done in extreme heat and high radiation, requiring them to wear protective gear. Around 400 miners toiled on this critical project. Next, the massive cleanup operation began. A vast amount of highly radioactive debris was scattered around the plant, particularly on the roofs of the adjacent buildings. Initially, officials planned to use robots for this hazardous job. They deployed remote-controlled machines to clear the dangerous material. However, the radiation was so intense that it fried the robots' electronic circuits, rendering them useless. Since the machines had failed, humans had to do the work. A massive workforce was mobilized, and these people came to be known as liquidators. Over the next few years, hundreds of thousands of individuals served as liquidators, performing the dangerous cleanup tasks. They wore protective clothing, but it often provided inadequate shielding. On the most contaminated areas, like the roof, workers could only stay for seconds at a time, sometimes less than 2 minutes before reaching their lifetime radiation limit. Alexander Yuvchenko, the engineer from the night of the accident, became gravely ill. He spent a year in the hospital. His hair fell out and his skin was covered in painful radiation burns. Many of his colleagues died from radiation sickness, but Alexander's resilience helped him survive after extensive treatment. Even after recovery, many survivors faced new hardships. People in their hometowns were often terrified of them, mistakenly believing that radiation sickness was contagious. This was untrue, as the sickness itself cannot be spread after a person is decontaminated. This ignorance led to survivors being shunned, isolated, and mistreated for years. The government also launched an investigation into the disaster's cause. Their initial conclusion placed the blame squarely on the plant operators. Several managers and engineers were tried and sent to prison. However, it later became widely acknowledged that fundamental flaws in the reactor's design and a poor safety culture were also major contributing factors. What happened next? In the aftermath of the accident, the full truth slowly came to light. The scientist Valery Legasov, who knew the entire story, recorded his uncensored account on a series of audio tapes just before he died 2 years later, ensuring the truth would not be buried. The disaster carried a devastating human cost. Around 31 plant workers and firefighters died shortly after the explosion from acute radiation sickness. Over the long term, the toll was higher. Scientists estimate that the radiation exposure may have led to the deaths of around 4,000 people from related cancers. To contain the ongoing radiation from the ruined reactor, an enormous steel and concrete structure was built over it. This massive shelter was called the sarcophagus. Its purpose was to seal off the damaged core and prevent more radioactive particles from escaping into the atmosphere. A large area surrounding the power plant was declared uninhabitable. This exclusion zone, covers approximately 1,000 square miles, or 2,600 square kilometers. People were permanently forbidden from living there due to the persistent radiation. Entire cities and towns like Pripyat were abandoned. In a surprising turn, the absence of humans allowed nature to reclaim the exclusion zone. Wildlife, including wolves, bears, and deer, began to thrive in the empty forests and deserted towns, their populations growing despite the lingering radiation. The Chernobyl accident profoundly altered global perspectives on nuclear energy. The world witnessed the catastrophic potential of a nuclear accident, causing many countries to halt the construction of new plants and to implement far stricter safety regulations. The memory of Chernobyl remains a powerful lesson about the intersection of technology, human error, safety, and the crucial importance of transparency. What do you believe was the most shocking consequence of the Chernobyl disaster?